Hello everyone, welcome back to the Dungeon Learner's Guide. Today we've got another Commander's Guild deck tech. This is deck number 215 and it's titled Hope You Didn't Want to Play Magic Today. And if you haven't seen the show before, what we're doing is randomly selecting a card from scryfall.com or from among suggested cards, working with a budget of $100 or less and building a commander deck for Magic the Gathering around a theme of the chosen card. So this week, our random card was suggested to us by Brian over on Patreon, and that card is Shared Fate. And Shared Fate is 4 and a blue for an enchantment that says if a player would draw a card, that player removes the top card of an opponent's library from the game face down instead, and each player may look at and play cards they removed from the game with Shared Fate as though they were in their hand. So this is a super weird card that basically forces all players at the table to play with each other's decks, which I don't think there's any other cards that do this. So obviously there's a lot of things that we can do with this and unique ways to build around it. But obviously, the first thing we've got to do is pick a commander for this deck. And the commander I decided on is actually going to be Zur the Enchanter. And Zur is 1 white, blue, black for a 1/4 human wizard. It's got flying. Whenever he attacks, you may search your library for an enchantment card with mana value 3 or less, put it onto the battlefield, then shuffle. Now, you'll notice Shared Fate is not an enchantment with mana value 3 or less. It does cost more than that, so Zur can't actually find the Shared Fate. However, Zur is capable of finding a lot of pieces that work well with Shared Fate and help build us toward the same game plan. So while he doesn't directly assist with finding our card of the week, he still assists in helping us build around it. So with that being said, let's jump into some of our themes for this deck, talk about what we're trying to do and what exactly makes this deck function. So first off, we have casting spells from exile, because if we can get Shared Fate onto the battlefield, everything that we cast is going to be cast from exile. We're no longer playing spells from our hand. And so because of that, we have cards like Hoarding Broodlord, which is 5 black, black, black for a 7/6 dragon. It has Convoke, flying, and when it enters the battlefield, search your library for a card, exile it face down, then shuffle. For as long as that card remains exiled, you may play it. And, most importantly, spells you cast from exile have Convoke. This gives us the ability to essentially cheapen our spells cast from exile. We can tap our creatures to help cast them along with our lands, so we can get that big boost of mana that our opponents aren't necessarily going to have access to. And speaking of casting spells with mana that our opponents don't have access to, that leads us to theme number 2, which is punishing our opponents for casting spells from exile. Because Shared Fate affects everybody, we can benefit from it, and we can also punish our opponents for the exact same thing. And the way we're going to do that is with cards like Aven Interrupter, which is 1 white, white for a 2/2 bird rogue. It's got flash, flying. When it enters the battlefield, exile target spell and it becomes plotted, and spells your opponents cast from graveyards or from exile cost 2 more to cast. That is a blanket effect that doesn't just apply to the spell that Aven Interrupter plots, but to every spell our opponents are casting from exile. If they are casting our spells from exile, say for example, they find a Hoarding Broodlord with Shared Fate, which normally would be 8 mana, now with Aven Interrupter costs 10. So this really slows our opponents down and puts us in a position where we get to benefit from Shared Fate and they get punished by it. Now though, moving on to our third theme of the deck, this one is going to be, well, stacks. We want to essentially shut our opponents completely out of the game. And one of the best ways we can do that is preventing them from taking game actions. And a great example of that is Ghostly Prison, which is 2 and a white for an enchantment. Creatures can't attack you unless their controller pays 2 for each creature attacking you. So not only do we want to make their spells cost more mana, not only do we want to really just prevent them from casting spells in general, but we also want to prevent them from attacking us, essentially starting to lock our opponents out of the game in ways that we benefit from, and again, they don't. So This is a bit of a weird deck, and if you are not a fan of stacks or shutting down your opponents and preventing people from playing the game, as the title of our deck suggests, hope they didn't want to play the game today, then this deck may not necessarily be for you. Keep that in mind because I know there are a lot of people who are opposed to stacks. Don't break this out against like a new player or something like that, but I want to give that little disclaimer before we jump into the rest of the deck tech. With that being said, though, let's move on and talk about some of our key cards. And these are cards that really help the deck run, help it function, and in some cases are win conditions or value engines all on their own. So the first card I want to talk about is Fortune Teller's Talent. And Fortune Teller's Talent is 1 blue for an enchantment class. When it comes in, you may look at the top card of your library at any time. You can level it up to level 2 for 3 and a blue. As long as you've cast a spell this turn, you may play cards from the top of your library. And level 3 for 2 and a blue. Spells you cast from anywhere other than your hand cost 2 less to cast. This is again a payoff for casting spells from exile once we hit level 3. But you'll also notice that the unique wording on it actually functions really well with Shared Fate, because Shared Fate forces us to draw cards from the top of our opponent's libraries. However, if we can get Fortune Teller's Talent to its level 2, we can just cast spells from the top of our library. This allows us to pretty much steal the best cards from our own deck so that our opponents can't draw them, and also leave something hopefully pretty useless on top like a land or a mana rock, allowing us to help control the state of the game, help control what our opponents are doing, and, once again, kind of lock them out of doing anything relevant. Plus, we have a ton of spells that really benefit us for casting spells from exile, so if we see one of those on top of our deck with Fortune Teller's Talent, we can take it away from our opponents to make sure that we continue to benefit and they don't. So Fortune Teller's Talent really does have to be leveled all the way up for it to be super, super useful, but even at level 2, it's still very good. Obviously, level 1 doesn't really help us much. It gives us a little bit of information in case someone takes cards from us with Shared Fate, but we really wanted to hit level 2 and level 3. Moving on to our second key card. This one is Bandit's Talent. So once again, a talent enchantment class from Bloomburrow. It is 1 and a black for an enchantment class. When it enters, each opponent discards 2 cards unless they discard a non-land card. Level 2 for 1 black. At the beginning of each opponent's upkeep, if that player has 1 or fewer cards in hand, they lose 2 life. And level 3 for 3 and a black. At the beginning of your draw step, draw an additional card for each opponent who has 1 or fewer cards in hand. Normally, when you'd be playing this card, you would want to be in a specific discard-heavy deck. But because of the way that Shared Fate functions in regards to mana and hand size, our opponents are going to slowly run out of cards in their hand because they're never replacing them. They're drawing cards that go directly into exile. So that means that we can force them to discard cards in their hand, essentially putting them down cards when it enters. But at level 2, we start to drain our opponents out because they can't replace the cards in their hand. They're always going to be taking that 2 life at the beginning of every single turn. And even beyond that, we can get an insane amount of card advantage because we get to draw basically 3 additional cards every single turn once our opponents have 1 or fewer cards in hand and we've hit level 3 on Bandit's Talent. Because again, they can't replace those cards. There's no way for them to get cards in their hand because every card they draw has to come into exile from an opponent's deck. So Bandit's Talent is essentially a win condition, letting us drain our opponents out, but is also a massive, massive card advantage engine because we're drawing that additional 3 cards. So overall, Bandit's Talent normally in a discard deck, but because of its unique interaction with Shared Fate, it actually does a significant amount of work in this deck as well. And then finally, moving on to our third key card, which is not another class, this one is Ghostly Pilferer. Ghostly Pilferer, 1 and a blue for a 2/1 Spirit Rogue. Whenever it becomes untapped, you may pay 2, If you do, draw a card. Whenever an opponent casts a spell from anywhere other than their hand, draw a card, and you can discard a card, and Ghostly Pilferer can't be blocked this turn. There's a lot going on with Ghostly Pilferer, and a lot that really makes it a phenomenal card. And personally, I play this as much as I can. I do genuinely like this card. I think it's very good. But in this deck, it kind of gets kicked into overdrive, because hopefully, once Shared Fate hits the battlefield, every spell that players are casting is going to be cast from exile, which is anywhere other than their hand, meaning every single time a player casts a spell, we get to draw a card, and we only spent 2 mana to put that permanent into play to activate that effect. Now, Ghostly Pilferer can also be a win condition. It can attack, it can't be blocked, it can help us draw cards if we need it early game. But the main reason it's here is that card draw effect when our opponents are casting spells, because that's what's going to help us really turn the tides of this game. And if we can really draw a ton of cards, there's not going to be much our opponents can do, because we're going to be so far ahead of the rest of the table that nobody's going to be able to catch up. That, though, brings us to the end of our key cards section. So the next part of this deck tech is to take a look at some cool interactions. These are cards that synergize really well with each other, might be combos, or might just be some kind of fun interaction and fun cards that I want to highlight. So this first set of cards is not exactly a fun set of cards, at least for your opponents, because it is Lavinia, Azorius Renegade, and Knowledge Pool. Lavinia is a white and a blue for a 2/2 legendary creature human soldier. Each opponent can't cast non-creature spells with mana value greater than the number of lands they control, and whenever an opponent casts a spell, if no mana was spent to cast it, counter that spell. So essentially, if our opponents are playing things for free, they get countered, and if they're ramping into stuff, at least with mana rocks or treasures, it's not going to work. They can't cast it. So, how do we turn that to our advantage? We use Knowledge Pool, which is 6 mana for an artifact. It has Imprint. When it enters the battlefield, each player exiles the top 3 cards of their library, and whenever a player casts a spell from their hand, that player exiles it. If the player does, they may cast another non-land card exiled with Knowledge Pool without paying that card's mana cost. This is essentially a lock on the entire table except for us, as long as we don't have Shared Fate in play. This is one of our backup win conditions in case we can't get our main win condition. Because what this does is every single time a player casts a spell, again, other than us, this does not affect us at all, then whenever an opponent casts a spell, they're going to exile it with Knowledge Pool, and then Knowledge Pool is going to say that they can exile and cast another card from Knowledge Pool. However, they cast that card without paying its mana cost. Lavinia will then counter that spell because no mana was spent to cast it, essentially locking our opponents out from ever playing another card and putting them in a position where they are no longer allowed to play the game. We, though, can continue to play the game, continue to cast spells from our hand, and therefore we can very easily just run over with the rest of the table, because we can find removal spells, get any attackers out of the way, any blockers out of the way, put ourselves in a position where we are slowly generating value, and even if it's slowly generating value, it's still going to be generating value at a much quicker rate than our opponents, because, once again, they can't cast spells. So again, something to be aware of as you're playing this deck. If this is something you know your play group is not going to be okay with, then maybe don't include it, maybe don't play this deck. But if you really want to, we'll say, punish your opponents or your play group for doing things a little bit over the top, this might be a good fit. But that is only cool interaction number 1. So we're going to move on to cool interaction number 2, which is kind of similar. It is Solemnity and 9 lives. So Solemnity, an enchantment for 2 and a white that says players can't get counters, and counters can't be put on artifacts, creatures, enchantments, or lands. And this is kind of a stacks piece on its own. If someone's playing a +1/+1 counter deck, it's really going to hurt them. It is worth noting that this affects almost every permanent. It does not affect planeswalkers. So that is something to be aware of. Obviously, Planeswalker's still going to work. But the reason we want this card is for some cards like 9 lives. Because 9 lives, 1 white for an enchantment, it has hexproof. If a source would deal damage to you, prevent that damage and put an incarnation counter on 9 lives. When there are 9 or more incarnation counters on 9 lives, exile it. And when 9 lives leaves the battlefield, you lose the game. So obviously we can only take 9 hits before losing the game with 9 lives, which doesn't feel great. However, with Solemnity, 9 lives is never going to get those incarnation counters, which means it's never going to exile itself, never leave the game, and therefore we don't get to lose the game. This is not infallible. There are definitely ways that our opponents can get around it. If they have a mass bounce spell or mass enchantment removal spell and 9 lives leaves, then we will lose the game. So that is something to be aware of. This can actually cost you the game in the long run. But with these two in play, along with some of our other effects like Lavinia, Knowledge Pool, and everything else, if we can shut our opponents out from casting most of their spells, and we have this in play, there's nothing that our opponents are going to be able to do. Because they can't do damage to us. They could still win the game in other ways if they have a you win the game card, but that's where our protection spells come into play. So overall, that is the vast majority of our deck. That's what we're trying to do. So the last thing we've got to do for this deck tech is take a look at the budget of the deck. And this week, we came incredibly close to our budget limit of $100 because we came in at $99.90, only 10 cents short of our budget. And a good portion of that is because I had to squeeze in one specific card, and that is Drannith Magistrate. Now, I know this is a game changer, so this does automatically boost this deck up, I believe, to bracket 3. Correct me if I'm wrong, I'm still getting used to the bracket system. But Drannith Magistrate is 1 and a white for a 1/3 human wizard. Your opponents can't cast spells from anywhere other than their hands. This card is the main reason that I built this as a stack style of deck, because if we have Shared Fate, every player is exiling cards from their hand or to cast from anywhere other than their hand, and because of Drannith Magistrate, they won't be able to cast the spells they exile with Shared Fate. However, it only affects our opponents. So we can continue to play the game, we can continue to do what we need to do to eventually get to a win condition, and there's nothing our opponents are going to be able to do to stop us because they're never going to be able to cast a spell from exile, and they're never going to be able to interact with Drannith Magistrate. Now, obviously, there are other ways they might be able to get around it. Maybe they have creatures in play, they can fight the Drannith Magistrate, they can attack into it, and we're forced to block. Whatever they've got. But we have plenty of cards in our deck that prevent those scenarios from happening. So obviously don't drop Drannith Magistrate on turn 2 and hope that it's going to live until you get the Shared Fate in line. Make sure that you build up to it first, because this is one of the key pieces to the lock for this deck. And if you give your opponents a chance to interact with it before the lock is set up, they will definitely do so. Mainly because this also affects commanders, and a lot of people have their decks built around their commanders, so they're not going to be happy when this hits the table. All of that to be said though, if you do need to trim down on the budget, you can cut out Drannith Magistrate. It will lessen some of the lock pieces in the deck and turn it into not necessarily a full stacks deck, but almost more of like an annoyance style deck, just kind of slowing your opponents down. So that is something to be aware of. On the other hand though, if you're looking for a card to put into the deck that's a little bit outside of our budget range, which in this case is anything more than 10 cents, then I do have a suggestion for you there as well. And the card that I would recommend putting in this week would be Teferi Time Raveler. Teferi is 1 white-blue for a 4 loyalty legendary planeswalker Teferi. Each opponent can cast spells only anytime they could cast a sorcery. +1 until your next turn. You may cast sorcery spells as though they had flash. And -3, return up to 1 target artifact, creature, or enchantment to its owner's hand and draw a card. The main reason that Teferi would be very good in this deck is because each opponent can only cast spells anytime they could cast a sorcery. There's no instant speed. That means that we're shutting off counter spells, which is incredibly important because we need to make sure that our things can hit the board. And it allows us to kind of play around with our stacks pieces in a way that our opponents may not necessarily be expecting. So for example, if we look back at Lavinia and Knowledge Pool, Teferi is another way to lock our opponents out with Knowledge Pool. Because of the way that the stack works, they wouldn't be able to cast spells from Knowledge Pool because that's being cast in response to something else and a trigger on the stack, making it an instant speed cast, so our opponents could get locked out with Teferi and Knowledge Pool in the same way they could get locked out with Lavinia and Knowledge Pool. So I think Teferi is another great way to prevent our opponents from doing what they need to be doing, and a great way for us to continue our stacks effects. However, if you are putting a card into the deck, you do also have to take a card out of the deck. And the card I would recommend taking out is Moderation, which is 1 white-blue, so same exact mana cost as Teferi. For an enchantment, you can't cast more than one spell each turn, and whenever you cast a spell, draw a card. Now, we have plenty of ways in this deck to only let players cast one spell a turn, again, shutting things down with Knowledge Pool. But Moderation helps us draw cards from it as well. Now, that being said, in my play testing with this deck, Moderation always felt like a win more card, and it honestly got stuck in our hand quite a bit, because there were definitely games where we didn't want to be stuck to casting one spell a turn, even if we would draw cards. And so by that logic, it got stuck in our hand. We didn't want to play it, didn't want to cast it, until we set up a lock, and at that point, our opponents can't interact with us anyway. So drawing an extra card each turn doesn't really affect us in the way that you might expect, because we're going to win the game. It's just going to take us a while. And while this can speed up that win condition, it is just kind of a win more. It's not going to win the game on its own. It's just going to help us draw into a win condition. So it really didn't do the things I was hoping it would do in this deck, and it just kind of felt a little bit clunky in ways that I, well, was hoping that it wouldn't. So that is my recommendation for an out-of-budget upgrade and what to replace with it. And so that officially brings us to the end of our deck tech portion of the video. So the next thing we're going to have to do is, of course, check out how this deck functions in a game. Before we get to that, though, I do want to take a second to highlight some of the ways that you can help support the channel and shout out all of our current patrons and channel members. So if you would like to support the channel, you can always just like the video and subscribe to the channel. That does help out a lot. We're trying to make that push to 2,000 subscribers. I would love it if you could all help us get there. But if you want to go a little bit above and beyond, you can find us over on Patreon, patreon.com/dungeonlearnersguide, and right here on YouTube as a channel member, which is linked in the description of the video below. So once you've joined those, you get access to things like the deck lists a week early, you get access to a Discord where we brew up a lot of the decks and also play the games that appear on the channel. So if you've ever wanted to be on the channel, that's a great way to do it. Plus, you get unedited gameplay videos, you get a random card sent to you every single month, you get the guarantee from me that your suggestions will be turned into videos. Eventually, I am a little bit backed up at the moment. I have a lot of suggestions to work through, but I will get to them, I promise. And so, with all that being said, I do want to give a massive shout out and a massive thank you to all of our patrons and channel members. So thank you goes out to William Swiftfoot, Doodle, Eric Way, Ryder Cole, Jeffrey Boos, Vintage, Tyler Esme, Sven von Nimwegen, Paddywhack, Jakar, Galen, Brian Holiday, Richard, the Oak Monster, and Tuku Spooner. To all of you, thank you all so much for all of your support. It really does mean a lot to me. And so, without any further ado though, let's jump into our game, see how this deck can function against some actual opponents. So this week, we are being joined by Luke playing Troyan Gutsy Explorer, Bilal playing Saint Traft and Rem Carlos, and Galen making his channel debut playing Stang Echo Warrior. So starting off with Luke and his Troyan deck, this is kind of similar to his Ruby deck, which has shown up on the channel before, in the sense that he wants to hit specific mana curves at specific times. So what he really wants to do is play any ramp spell on turn 1. So that could be an enchantment, that could be a mana dork, that could be an artifact, anything that gets him to 3 mana on turn 2. That means that he can then play his commander on turn 2, and that will push him to 6 mana on turn 3. And the rest of his deck is filled with 6 drops. Not 7 or 8, not like 6 plus drops, just 6 drops. So with that, he's able to just start pumping out a ton of massive creatures starting as early as turn 3. And I think that this is a super unique deck and super cool. And I'm always a fan of Luke's decks that have a specific mana function or mana curve that allows him to make his deck work. So I'm very excited to see how this goes. And I'm hoping we can get some of our lock pieces set up so those 6 drops don't start beating our face in on turn 3. Moving on, our next opponent is Bilal playing Saint Traft and Rem Carlos. And this is pretty much a Convoke deck. He wants to tap Saint Traft and Rem Carlos, make a ton of tokens, and then cast Convoke spells, untap them, tap them again, so on and so on. I know that Bilal has said that this is mostly a pre-con deck, so he is using mostly the pre-con. However, I also know that when Bilal typically says he uses mostly the pre-con, that means he keeps like half of the deck and changes half of it. So I'm interested to see what upgrades he's made, because I have also kind of been looking at this commander myself, and I think Bilal is a phenomenal deck builder and definitely someone to take inspiration from when you're looking at building a deck. So I'm looking forward to see what upgrades he's made so I can kind of maybe sneak that into my own deck building style. And then finally, we have our final opponent, like I said, Galen, making his debut on the channel, playing Stang Echo Warrior. And Stang is a very unique commander, one that I've actually never played against before. Actually, I think that can be true for all of the opponents this week, which is kind of cool. But Stang is kind of like doubling up on all of his enchantments, all of his artifacts, anything that's equipped to it. So it is, in a way, a Voltron-style deck where he wants to build Stang up to be an unstoppable threat. But at the same time, he actually gets a duplicate copy of it, kind of doubling up on his Voltron strategy, which I think is super unique. I don't think there's any other commanders that do that. So I am very excited to see what this deck can do. I think that if I had to pick one of these 3 decks to be the most concerned about, it is Saint Traft and Rem Carlos, for a couple of different reasons. I know that with Troyan, he's sticking with all of the 6 drops. I can't imagine there's too many 6 drops that deal with some of the stuff we're trying to do. Stang, probably a little bit more focused on the Voltron, but knowing Bilal, he's going to have counter spells, he's going to have interaction, and he's probably going to have some massive spells that we are going to have to deal with. So I think that is the biggest threat we're facing at the table. But let me know down in the comments what you think. Get your predictions in. Are there any decks you think are going to walk out the winner? I always love to see what people think walking into it. So let me know what you think. Drop some comments below, like the video, subscribe to the channel, and let's jump into this game, and I'll talk to you all once it's done. At the start of the game, Luke goes first, followed by myself, Bilal, and then Galen. On Luke's first turn, he plays a Rejuvenating Springs and casts Soul Ring. I play a Desert of the Glorified. Bilal plays a Mystic Monastery. Galen plays a Forest and casts Fire Wild Border Post, returning the forest to his hand. Luke plays a Forest and casts his commander, Troyan Gutsy Explorer, which can tap for 2 mana, but only for spells with mana value 5 or greater, and it can also tap to let Luke draw a card and discard a card. I play a Plains and cast Mind Stone. Bilal plays a Mountain and casts Arcane Signet. Galen plays a Forest, casts Cranial Archive, which can be activated to exile itself, shuffle target player's graveyard into their library, and let Galen draw a card. Luke plays a Forest and casts Lunar Hatchling. I play an Azorius Chancery, returning a Plains to my hand. Bilal plays an island and casts his commander Saint Traft and Rem Carlos, untapping it whenever he casts a spell with Convoke, creating a 1/1 human token when it's tapped for the first time each turn, a 1/1 spirit token for the second time, and a 4/4 angel token if it's the third time. Galen plays a forest and casts Saddle of the Cavalier. Luke casts See the Unwritten, revealing the top 8 cards of his library, and since he controls a creature with power 4 or greater, putting 2 creatures from among the revealed cards onto the battlefield and the rest into his graveyard. This has him revealing Disciple of Fraelis, Grun the Lonely King, Boreal Druid, Llanowar Elves, Birds of Paradise, Fyndhorn Elves, and 2 forests. Among these, he chooses to put Grun the Lonely King and Disciple of Fraelis into play. When the Disciple enters, he sacrifices his hatchling, gaining 6 life and drawing 6 cards, since it has 6 power. Once that's resolved, he plays a forest and casts Sky Shroud Ranger, which can tap to let Luke put a land from his hand into play. At the end of turn, I flash in Nowhere to Run, giving Troyan -3/3, killing it. Notably, this also allows my opponent's creatures with ward or hexproof to be targeted as though they didn't have those abilities. On my turn, I cast my commander, Zur the Enchanter, play an Arid Archway, returning Desert of the Glorified to my hand and surveilling 1. Bilal plays a Battlefield Forge and casts Divine Visitation, so now whenever he would create a creature token, he creates a 4/4 angel with vigilance and flying instead. This lets him attack me for 3 with Traft and Rem, making a 4/4 angel token. Then I block with Zur, taking no damage and keeping both creatures alive. Galen plays an Underdark Rift and casts his commander, Stang Echo Warrior, which creates a tapped and attacking 3/4 Stang Twin token whenever it attacks, also creating a token copy of each aura and equipment attached to it. Then he sacrifices all tokens created this way in the next end step. Luke moves straight to combat on his turn, attacking Bilal with Grun, doubling his power and toughness since he's attacking alone, turning him into a 10/10, but Bilal blocks with his angel token, killing it and taking no damage. Then in his second main phase, Luke casts Thunderfoot Baloth, giving all his creatures +2/+2 in trample as long as he controls his commander. He also plays a forest and casts Wild Growth, enchanting a forest so it can tap for an additional mana. On my turn, I attack Luke for 1 with Zur, triggering his ability, so I search my library for an enchantment with mana value 3 or less, putting it into play. With this trigger, I choose Propaganda, making my opponents pay 2 mana to attack me. In my second main phase, I play a Swamp and cast Xanathar Guild Kingpin, letting me choose an opponent in my upkeep, preventing them from casting spells for the turn, looking at the top card of their library, and being able to play the top card of their library until the end of turn. Bilal plays a Riverglide Pathway and casts Felwar Stone, and also casts Staff of the Storyteller, creating a 4/4 angel when it enters, putting a story counter on the staff whenever a token enters under his control, and he can activate it to remove a story counter from it and draw a card. After that, he casts Mighty Servant of Leoku, which has a crew cost of 4, and if it becomes crewed by exactly 2 creatures, then when it deals combat damage to a player, Bilal draws 2 cards. Galen plays a Terramorphic Expanse and equips Stang with the Saddle of the Cavalier, giving him +3/+3 and preventing him from being blocked by creatures with power 3 or less. Then he sacrifices Terramorphic Expanse, searching his library for a basic land and putting it into play tapped. Luke plays a forest and activates Sky Shroud Ranger, putting an island into play from his hand. He then recasts his commander Troyan, turning on the Thunderfoot Baloth, so all his creatures get +2/+2 in trample. This means he's able to attack me with Grun, paying for propaganda, doubling his power, hitting me for 14 total damage. In my upkeep, I choose Bilal with Xanathar's trigger, and due to the limitations of playing over webcam, Bilal reveals the top card of his library, revealing Vicious Shadows. Then I attack Luke for 1 with Xur, this time searching my library for Phyrexian Unlife, preventing me from losing the game for having 0 or less life, but when I have 0 or less life, all sources deal damage to me as though they had Infect. In my second main phase, I replay Desert of the Glorified and cast Rest in Peace, exiling all graveyards, and now, whenever anything would go to the graveyard, it's exiled instead. At the end of turn, Bilal uses his Angel and Commander to crew the Servant of Lyoko, getting another Angel and putting a counter on Staff of the Storyteller. On Bilal's turn, he plays a Plains and casts Vicious Shadow, now doing damage to target player equal to the number of cards in their hand when a creature dies. Then he uses Traft and Rem, along with an Angel token, to crew the Servant, making another Angel, and attacking Luke with it for 6. Luke calls him on his bluff though, blocking with Thunderfoot Baloth, killing the Servant and taking no damage. Notably, this would trigger Vicious Shadows, but because of my Rest in Peace, no creatures actually die, they're just exiled, so Bilal's enchantment doesn't trigger. In his second main phase, Bilal activates Staff of the Storyteller, removing a counter from it to draw a card. Galen plays a Mountain and casts Most Wanted, enchanting Stang, giving him +2/+1, and letting Galen make 2 treasure tokens when he dies. This lets him attack me with Stang for 8, paying 2 for propaganda, and also create a Stang twin attacking me for 8. I block the original Stang with Xanathar, killing the Beholder, then I still take 8 damage. At the end of turn, Galen sacrifices the Stang twin, not getting the death trigger for Most Wanted since it's exiled by Rest in Peace. Luke casts Sage Eye Avengers, which has prowess and, whenever it attacks, returns a creature to its owner's hand if it has less power than the Avengers. He then attacks Bilal for 5 with Disciple of Freyalise, and attacks Galen for 14 with Grun and the Baloth. I play a Plains and attack Luke for 1 with Xur, searching my library for Solemnity, putting it into play, and now preventing players, creatures, enchantments, artifacts, and lands from getting counters put on them. Notably, this combined with Phyrexian Unlife means I don't lose the game for having 0 or less life, and I also can't get Infect counters. Unfortunately though, this doesn't stop Luke from flashing in Great Oak Guardian before blocks, untapping all his creatures, giving them +2/+2, then since the Guardian has reach, he's able to block and kill my commander, taking no damage. Second main phase, I cast Deadly Cover-Up, destroying all creatures. Bilal plays an island and recasts his commander, Traft and Rem, then activates Staff of the Storyteller, removing a counter from it to draw a card. Galen plays a mountain and recasts his commander, Stang. Luke casts Read the Tides, drawing 3 cards, then Forest cycles a Timberland Ancient and plays the breeding pool that he gets with it tapped, then passes. On my turn, I play a Plains and cast Rassilon the War President, giving each non-creature spell I cast from exile Conspire, and also exiling a card from the top of my library in my upkeep, losing 2 life and being able to play that card for as long as it remains exiled. Bilal casts City on Fire, tripling the damage his sources would deal. Notably, he tapped his commander to help convoke the spell, making an Angel token and then untapping his commander. After that, he casts Talisman of Conviction and attacks Luke for 3 with Traft and Rem, tripling the damage to 9 and creating another Angel token. Galen casts a Sanctuary Blade and equips Stang with the Saddle of the Cavalier, giving him +3/+3. This lets him attack me with both Stang and the Stang twin he creates, paying 2 for propaganda, hitting me for 12 total damage. Then at the end of turn, he sacrifices the twin token. Luke casts Hydra Omnivore, which deals damage to each other opponent equal to the combat damage it deals to an opponent. Then he also casts Elvish Mystic and passes. In my upkeep, I lose 2 life and exile an Orzhov Basilica from the top of my library, and cast Hoarding Broodlord, using Rassilon to help convoke it, searching my library for a card, exiling it, giving all my spells cast from exile convoke, and being able to play the exiled spell for as long as it remains exiled. Finally, I play the Orzhov Basilica from exile, returning a swamp to my hand. Bilal casts a Gilded Lotus and uses that to cast the Golden Throne, which can tap to sacrifice a creature and create 3 mana of any colors, and it also allows Bilal, the next time he would lose the game, to instead exile the throne and go to 1 life. After that, Bilal attacks Galen for 9 with his commander, creating another angel token, and also attacks Luke and I both with an angel for 12, paying for my propaganda. On Galen's turn, he casts Tanuki Transplanter, adding green mana equal to its power or the creature's power that it's attached to whenever it attacks. He immediately reconfigures it, attaching it to Stang, and attacks Bilal with Stang for 6, creating a Stang twin, also attacking Bilal for 6, creating 6 green mana. Bilal blocks the original Stang with one of his angels, killing both creatures while Bilal takes 6 from the twin. In his second main phase, Galen uses his 6 floating mana to cast Nemesis Mask and Gilded Pinions, making a treasure token when the pinions enter. Luke plays a forest and casts Betrayal at the Vault, having his Hydra do damage equal to its power to 2 target creatures, choosing to hit both of Bilal's angel tokens for 8, killing them. Once that resolves, he casts Sea God Scorn, returning 3 creatures and/or enchantments to their owner's hands, choosing Phyrexian Unlife, Divine Visitation, and City on Fire. Unfortunately, since I tutored for Shared Fate with Hoarding Broodlord instead of a counterspell, Luke's spell resolves, and since I'm at -8 life, I'm knocked out of the game as soon as Phyrexian Unlife leaves the battlefield. After that, Luke attacks Galen for 8 with Hydra Omnivore, also doing 8 damage to Bilal. On Bilal's turn, he casts Whirlwind of Thought, now drawing a card whenever he casts a non-creature spell. Then he recasts Divine Visitation, drawing a card, and this lets him attack Luke for 3 with Trafton Rem, making an angel token, putting a counter on Staff of the Storyteller, and Luke blocks with Elvish Mystic, killing it and taking no damage. In his second main phase, Bilal plays a Castle Ardenvale and recasts City on Fire, sacrificing his angel with the Golden Throne, drawing a card and untapping his commander. Notably, now that my Rest in Peace is gone, the angel and Elvish Mystic dying also trigger Vicious Shadows, doing 4 total damage to Luke since he has 2 cards in hand. Galen equips his Tanuki with Saddle of the Cavalier, giving it +3/+3, and casts Stump Stomp, having the Tanuki deal damage equal to its power, which is currently 5, to Trafton Rem, killing Bilal's commander, triggering Vicious Shadows, and now doing 6 damage to Luke thanks to the City on Fire. Luke casts a Colossal Dread Mask, immediately equipping it to Hydra Omnivore, giving it +6/+6 and Trample. This lets him attack Bilal for 14, also doing 14 to Galen, knocking him out of the game. On Bilal's turn, he plays an island and casts Preordain, drawing a card, scrying 2, then drawing another card. After that, he casts Wildfire Awakener for X = 10, creating 10 1/1 elemental tokens that turn into 10 4/4 angel tokens. Unfortunately, on Luke's turn, he's only able to cast Strong Brutish Thespian and Terra Stomper, neither of which can stop the horde of angels Bilal just created, so when Bilal untaps, he simply has to attack for a massive 120 damage, knocking Luke out and winning Bilal the game. Alright, so that was a sweet game. Definitely a lot going on in that game. And I think that really the game was decided by Bilal's divine visitation. I think that him being able to get that down early and continuously making angels really did lead him to be the winner of this game. And even though the rest of us really tried to fight against it, we kind of got stuck in this position where there wasn't much we were able to do. And unfortunately, I think that Bilal winning is probably my fault. I think that everybody really focused on me because of what I was doing on my board. Being able to lock out the game with Solemnity and Phyrexian Unlife meant that everybody was focused on me because there was nothing they could do to stop it. So when I was finally dealt with, which in very cool fashion, Luke got to bounce my Phyrexian Unlife, I was at -8 life and just died. Super cool way to die. I'm not upset by that. Once I was out of the way, though, it meant that everyone had to turn their focus on everybody else, and Bilal had such an engine going, there wasn't much that Galen or Luke were able to do to stop him. That being said, though, Luke has still put on a very impressive performance. I was very impressed by how he was able to manage to just keep dropping giant creatures turn after turn after turn. And I have no doubt that that deck is very powerful. I think he just kind of got a little unlucky when Bilal could, drop 120 power worth of flyers in one turn. So not exactly the counter to your deck that you're looking for. And then last but not least, Galen's deck, also very cool. I think Stang was super sweet. I think that he suffered a little bit from multiple removal spells, multiple board wipes, being able to run it into an opponent's creature that could kill it. So I think that really held Galen back a little bit. I also noticed he got stuck on mana a little as well. So I think that Stang is a deck that could do very powerful things, and I would love to see it do its thing again in the future. So hopefully we'll get to see Galen run it back at some point. Overall, though, hopefully you all enjoyed the game. Hopefully you enjoyed the deck tech as well. Thank you all so much for watching. Thank you for liking the video, subscribing to the channel. If you have any suggestions, please do put those in the comments. Send them to me via email on any of our social media accounts. They're all in the description of the video. But thank you all so much for watching, and I will see you all on the other side of the Dungeon Learner's Guide.